The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of May 17, 2026. The podcast that takes off the mask. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's patinize the news of the bogus. So we'll start off with even more piracy cases dropped as a result of the Supreme Court's ruling in Cox v. Sony. We've covered before the cartel members suing US ISP RCN, a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that's been dragging on for 5 years based on the same old. The filmmakers allege that RCN failed to deny access to the entire internet to people they asserted, sans evidence, were repeat infringers. This is the same group that also sued Grand, Frontier, and Verizon. The Supreme Court has already thrown out Grand, and the Verizon case was dropped, as was another case against Altice. The RCN case is now history too, as the film companies have agreed to dismiss the lawsuit with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Again, the Supreme Court has said that mere knowledge of infringement is not enough to be liable for contributory infringement. You would have to show that they either actively induced infringement or made a service tailored to piracy with no substantial non-infringing uses. In this case, there was another dimension that had already been dismissed. The cartel members tried to subpoena Reddit to get the identities of users who posted pro-piracy comments. Those were thrown out by Judge Laurel Beeler on First Amendment grounds. The case was also notable because they were also seeking a site-blocking injunction requiring them to block the entire domains of sites such as the Pirate Bay, LeadX, YTS, RARBG, and others. That was denied as a standalone cause of action, but remained available as a potential remedy if the filmmakers won this case. So for now, no site blocking, but of course in response there are several site blocking bills in the works, and Congress is expected to seriously consider at least one of them before the end of the current term. Shows you how much they hate the First Amendment. Another case killed by Cox is a case against Google by major publishing houses including Macmillan, Elsevier, and McGraw-Hill, accusing the tech giant of textbook piracy. Prior to Cox, the court had already dismissed the vicarious copyright infringement claim and the claims of violations of New York general business law. Now, Google has moved for a partial judgment based on the fact that the contributory infringement claim has been invalidated by Cox. They filed, "Plaintiffs do not and cannot claim that Google provided a service tailored to infringement. The shopping platform plainly has non-infringing uses, and they do not even use the word induce or its variants in the complaint. Nor do they assert that Google intended the shopping platform to be used for infringement. Instead, the theory plaintiffs set forth in their complaint is one of material contribution, that Google can be deemed to have the requisite intent to cause infringement because Google continued to run ads from merchants knowing that those merchants were advertising infringing content. This is precisely the theory that Cox rejected. If they succeed, and they should, the only claim left would be a trademark claim under the Lanham Act, since the advertisements displayed unauthorized images of their trademark textbook covers. That's the problem. They've stuck in way too many different kinds of violations of the same act. Is the Supreme Court going to have to knock down each and every one? It shouldn't make any sense that an invalid criteria of scienter for one claim should be valid for another, but that seems to be where we are. Google has cited fair use and innocent infringement as defenses against the trademark claim, but they're also questioning whether they have the right to sue at all. The textbooks were made as works for hire, which means that it's actually the universities that employed the authors who own the copyrights, not the publishers. Copyright law is a mess, but then that's what happens when you try to make a law about a concept that has no ethical justification whatsoever.
Presenting the greatest game this side of Yugoth. You are H.P. Lovecraft's cat, and your name is Nick. Right, we can't say that on a podcast. Well, anyway, that's the point. Your name is a joke, so now you are out for revenge. You become a Necronomicat. Using the Necronomicon, you come to the present day to buy a cat. That's a gun. For a cat. It's a fat cat. But the Necronomicon is treacherous, and it let in Lovecraft's monsters. Now, in a crumbling world, you must fight. Build your team, buy guns and armor, buy items of dubious legality, defeat the bosses of each level, then take Lovecraft down. Play Necronomicat. The link is at cat.bogosity.tv. Yeah, we're doing cat.bogosity.tv, not that other one. What, you want me to get kicked off the internet or something?
So a Maryland Democrat has proposed a bill to reform the Supreme Court. And by reform, read cheat. Johnny Ozlewski has proposed a bill to limit the term of Supreme Court justices to 18 years. Why? Because that would kick out Alito, Roberts, and Thomas. Whereas making the limit 17 years would kick out Sotomayor by the end of the year. Funny that. So, of course, there's no grandfather clause. Instead, it would provide for a fair and orderly transition to the new system. This is absolutely unconstitutional and has been since 1791. The Constitution makes it clear. SCOTUS terms are for good behavior, basically until impeached, and Congress is given no power to set a time limit to how long they can serve. It was only after pundits pointed out to Ozlewski exactly how stupid he was being that he redid the bill to be a proposed constitutional amendment, but even then there are severe issues. Given that these supposed massive problems with these justices hasn't resulted in even a single impeachment, this just seems like an end run around the checks and balances of the Constitution. And the issues are basically they don't like how they ruled on abortion, gun rights, and gerrymandering. So this is really just a way of second-guessing judicial opinions, breaching separation of powers. The founders wanted the Supreme Court to be insulated from election cycles and political retaliation by Congress or the president. With life sentences, you have, for better or for worse, a more stable Supreme Court, with appointments happening at chaotic times and the decisions as to their replacements being left largely to luck. Biden got to appoint 1 justice, Trump 3, Obama 3, George W. Bush 5, Clinton 2, and so on. Jimmy Carter didn't get to appoint any, whereas Nixon got to appoint 6. Regular 18-year terms would basically mean a president would only make the nomination for the next 4 administrations, and in the election before, you'd know ahead of time how many justices that president would nominate in the next 4 years. That makes them far less insulated from political warfare. The founders made the Supreme Court the least democratic branch for a reason. The whole point of the Supreme Court is to protect the public and the people's rights from the shifting populist tyranny of democracy. This bill would make them more subject to the changing whims of populist majority and deep state interests. And if they can do this, what else can they do? Slippery slope not being a fallacy, this newfound power of Congress would open the door wide to partisan removals, court packing, loyalty tests, and even overriding judicial review entirely. And once the Supreme Court is seen as a political institution, then whichever party is in power at the time will keep working to tweak it to their self-interests. Term limits now, then soon what? Expansion of seats? Stripping jurisdiction? Partisan restructuring? At some point, it stops being a co-equal branch of government and becomes just another administrative body. We've seen this happen in other countries, such as Hungary under Viktor Orban, based on tensions that are nothing new, but are what we've seen since the founding, with the constitutional terms representing a balance of those concerns. Hey, how about, why don't we see them put term limits on themselves before doing it to anyone else? Take care of the fossils in your own house before sticking your noses into others.
I'm brother Ezekiel, and I know how naughty thou hast been. So naughty, thou needst a VPN. Hide thy iniquity from prying eyes, and make sure the liturgical authorities remain ignorant. Take thy browser to bpn.bogosity.tv to get BoxPN. At $6.36 a month, a price only the most penurious would balk at, thou shalt have unlimited high-speed connections to servers all over the globe. And they don't log connections. Thy privacy is assured. That should please you sinners. Just remember, the Lord sees all. When traveling, make it look like thou art still home. At home, ensure the elders at your ISP don't take out their judgment with traffic shaping and DMCA notices. Up to 5 devices can connect at once, almost one for every deadly sin. Keep thy sins private. Go to bpn.bogosity.tv.
So Eileen Wang got herself elected as mayor of the Southern California city of Arcadia, basically as a DEI hire. Her campaign was all about becoming the first Chinese-born Asian American woman to become a city councilor and later mayor of Arcadia. That basically meant that she had no competition for the Democratic primary, and since 49.6% of Arcadians are registered Democrat compared to only 25.2% Republican, she sailed into office at the general election. Just one problem. She's a Chinese spy. Wang resigned as mayor after the federal government unsealed her guilty plea for acting as a secret agent for the People's Republic of China. For example, the Chinese Communist Party would give her office responses to a news item that would be uncomfortable to China, and she would publish those as if they were directly from her office. She passed along literal communist propaganda. Her office also participated in the punishing of Chinese expats who spoke out against Xi Jinping, including putting him under illegal surveillance, slashing the tires on his car, and destroying statues he made depicting Xi and his wife. They also attempted to buy components of missiles, air defense radar, drones, and cryptographic ignition keys. These agents, which included Qi Guanghai of China and John Miller of the United Kingdom, were captured by the FBI, after which they cut off their electronic bracelets and fled to China. Wang's handler, John Chen, has been sentenced to 20 months in federal prison for acting as an illegal agent of the PRC and conspiracy to bribe a public official. Her fiancé, Yao Ning's son, operated a Chinese propaganda website called U.S. News Center and published CCP propaganda. He was arrested the same day as Chen and charged with acting as a covert agent of the PRC. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Wang herself faces a sentence of up to 10 years in federal prison. And she was caught lying about it. In a press conference, she said, quote, "He's not my fiancé. Whoever wants to see if he's my fiancé or former fiancé, please give proof." So people said, "Okay, here you go," and provided clips of her saying, quote, "To my fiancé, director's son, who walks streets with me every single day, who is a real leader of me." According to U.S. Attorney Amanda B. Elbajan, quote, "The website that we're talking about looked like a standard news website that got a lot of traffic in the community. If you signed on, it looked kind of like the CNN website does, with lots of different regular news updates, and then pepper it in with these items of propaganda." But the real news here isn't about the agent or the propaganda. It's about how the voters put her in. She campaigned on the first this and that and everything else. First Asian, first Chinese, first woman, and so on. Other than that, everything was just boilerplate Democratic talking points you could have gotten from any other Democratic candidate, and probably with a lot more of a thought-out policy. The people voted for her not because of her policies or her ability, but simply because of these identity markers. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know what she was. She just checked off boxes for them. That makes you easy to manipulate and victimize. Let this be a huge lesson about identity politics. I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now it's time to desicatify this week's biggest Bogon emitter. So here we have the typical process. People have a problem they complain about, government proposes a solution, and the solution just so happens to give them more power over you and destroy your privacy. Case in point, robocalls. We all hate them, and we know they're going to experience more of them in the coming election year. So FCC Commissioner Brendon Carr has his solution, the very kind of phone user registry privacy advocates have spent decades fighting. In the 90s, they wanted to do it because of drug dealers. In the 2000s, it was because of terrorists. In the 2010s, it was because of CSAM. So now, I guess it's robocalls. The FCC has now unanimously approved a proposal requiring telecom providers to verify their customers by government-issued ID, physical address, legal name, and existing phone numbers. It would apply to traditional carriers, mobile operators, and even VoIP services. Carr said, quote, "As we have continued to investigate the problem of illegal robocalls over the last year, it has become clear that some originating providers are not doing enough to vet their customers, allowing bad actors to infiltrate our U.S. phone networks." Okay, so why does that mean we have to give up our privacy? If it's bad actors from outside the country, how will this help? Not to mention the fact that these are done through illegal phone equipment that spoofs the identity and number of the person calling. No, this will do nothing to stop robocalls. It's just an excuse for surveillance. It's the same kind of KYC AML people have had to go through to comply with anti-money laundering rules. The FCC also wants carriers to retain documentation for at least 4 years, and they also want them to check their customers' IDs against government watch lists. If they don't, they face fines of up to $15,000 for each illegal robocall. The big problem is prepaid phones and services. These are used by journalists to protect sources, domestic violence survivors to avoid being traced or stalked, and whistleblowers, activists, or anyone else facing privacy issues. Not only that, but when parents buy a phone for their child, they will have to give up the identity of the child to the phone company. The FCC is now threatening all of this. All to protect you from a mild annoyance you can avoid just by not responding to them. So all of that makes the FCC and Brendon Carr this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now a rare treat. 2 winners of our Silver Cluon Award. Does the Second Amendment cover the right to own machine guns? Of course it does. Don't be an idiot. And now, 2 states, and not the 2 you might think, are now considering bills to allow the sale of machine guns to its citizens using a loophole in the Firearm Owners Protection Act. West Virginia has introduced Senate Bill 1071 to create an Office of Public Defense within the West Virginia State Police with the authority to acquire and sell machine guns to qualified persons eligible to own firearms under state and federal law. According to the law, federal law permits governments to transfer machine guns to law-abiding citizens under the National Firearms Act of 1934 and the Gun Control Act of 1968. So you couldn't just buy them from any FFL, but you could get them from your local state police troop HQ, including Colt M16s, FM249 saws, and H&K MP5s, and their equivalents from other manufacturers. Kentucky has now followed suit with House Bill 749 to also set up an Office of Public Defense in the state. So now we have 2 states using a federal exemption to bypass the artificial, unconstitutional barriers of the 1986 Hughes Amendment, which was rammed through late by a questionable voice vote, by allowing their citizens to have the same arms the founders intended for the security of a free state. In both states, that would mean no longer having to purchase a transferable for anywhere between $25,000 to $60,000 just to get government permission to exercise your rights. In both cases, purchases will prioritize in-state manufacturers, boosting the local trade and firearms economy while making it more difficult for Congress and the courts to claim federal jurisdiction because interstate commerce. Instead, with the Bruin test and with machine guns having existed since 1718 and used by American militias for centuries, these bills would seem to pass constitutional muster. It'll be an uphill battle to get them passed, but at the same time, this is just the beginning. Hopefully this will be the new trend among states, following on the increased popularity of constitutional carry, and we'll have West Virginia and Kentucky to thank for it. So enjoy your shiny new silver Cluons, and I promise I won't tell anyone if you carry them without a permit. And now let's megaloculostomatize this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And this week it goes to Grand Rapids Mayor David Legrand for basically showing his true colors. He quite clearly demonstrates the hatred and the contempt and the spite and derision and snobbery he has towards you and me. Like he and the government is so much better. Just take a listen.
I think as a community, we have to start having some shaming around gun possessions. I think if you've got a gun, you should be ashamed of yourself. I really do.
Wow. Just wow. Hey, Legrand, do police in your city have guns? I think they do. How about the bad guys? Do they have guns? I think they do. But you're going to shame people for wanting to have the means of defending themselves from those self-same bad guys.
So, I get that we got a Second Amendment. I get it. But, you also should be ashamed of yourself if you smoke. That's not against the law.
I fail to see any way in which smoking a cigarette could defend yourself from harm, whereas a gun can be used to defend yourself from harm or even from losing your life. Where do Democrats keep finding these intellectual and emotional infants to elect into positions of power? I mean, as if the criminals are going to be going, oh, gee, now I feel bad, so I'll get rid of my guns. Seriously, what is wrong with you?
Nobody gardens with a gun, right? Nobody changes their tire with a gun. What they're for is killing human beings.
I see I'm going to have to explain this again. If guns are for killing human beings, they're really bad at it. I mean, think about it. In this country, there are more guns than people, and yet we're not all dead. So this whole guns are for killing people is just such an immature, low IQ soundbite. What guns are actually for is having the capability of killing people. That's how they become such an effective deterrent. Guns are an equalizer. Without them, the biggest, meanest animals get to terrorize regular folks like you and me, and especially weaker people like women, the elderly, and the disabled. But with a gun, that 220-pound human gorilla is no threat to the 98-pound old lady who has an extra couple pounds of metal to even the score.
I just see so much more harm, just like cigarettes. I see so much more harm done than benefit.
Yeah, that's because you're a piece of shit prosecutor who treats everyone around him who isn't in the government as either a criminal or a child. You don't see the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times a year that an armed citizen uses a gun to prevent a crime. I just did a quick search, and even limiting myself to the last month, I found a food delivery driver in Nashville who protected himself from a carjacker, a case in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where a citizen shot a man who fired into a crowd of people in a public park, and 2 masked men who tried to rob a South Carolina barbershop at gunpoint who were scared away when one of the customers drew his gun and fired. We've been over and over the lives that are saved by law-abiding citizens owning firearms. But the real thing you need to do is remember your bastion. Think about not only the seen, but the unseen. And every piece of data we have shows that guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens are an effective deterrent.
I think if you own a gun, you should be ashamed of yourself. And you should really do some self-reflection.
Yeah? Well, I think if you try to make people ashamed for exercising their fundamental rights, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. There, how about that? Hey, how about this, Legrand? You give up your guns first. You sit there protected by men with guns 100% of the time, whereas we, as confirmed by one court case after another, are protected by police and other government agents 0% of the time because they have consistently found that government has no duty to protect you. But you're telling the decent, law-abiding people of your city that they should feel ashamed for wanting to have the same protection against criminals that you do? You are a useless, worthless, intellectual infant who doesn't care about anyone but himself. So all of that makes Grand Rapids Mayor David Legrand this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this Tell Your Old Man to Drag Walton and Lanier Up and Down the Court for 48 Minutes edition of the Bogosity Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support, and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at the Discord, Patreon, or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Ludwig von Mises. If one rejects laissez, faire on account of man's fallibility and moral weakness, one must, for the same reason, also reject every kind of government action. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.